Question 1. In what ways does your media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? Our film uses basic conventions of a horror film throughout the opening so that it is clear to the audience the genre and what they can expect throughout the entire film. To begin, the setting of our opening is set in a graveyard, which is a typical set for a horror film, and there is no other place that can convey death as much as a place like this, and therefore that is why we chose this to be our setting for the whole piece. Straight away, this can communicate the idea of horror and creates the eerie atmosphere that is typical convention in a horror or thriller to add suspension and scare. The darkness of the location also creates a sense of uncertainty, and this is used so that the audience are unaware of what may happen during this short opening.
Also, within our piece, we use point of view shots, which are a classic shot to be used within a horror film, as they create perspective of what is going on and so that the audience feel more included in what is happening. After this, we include a handheld shot whilst the protagonist walks down a pathway, which creates a feeling of the unknown for the audience as to what is to happen next, and this is a typical technical code used in most horror films. The framework of our piece is done so that we use shots to show the antagonist creeping up behind the protagonist quickly, showing that the time is running out for the male actor. This is often used in horror films to show that the protagonist is being crept upon, and this is why we use this.
We use editing in our piece to show attention, and the cuts between frames create a suspension for the audience on what is happening throughout. For example, we fade the antagonist off screen to reappear further towards the male whilst he continues to walk. Although this took a while to edit into position, it adds effect of the opening and clearly shows what is going on, and is very often used in famous horror films. The visual style of our piece also adds to the atmosphere, as we impose dark colours onto the screen so that the visual effects were darker and more creepy, which is often used in a horror to add to the content of the film.
We use a prop of a mobile phone to show the character's communication with the outside world, and he says, which gives the audience a hint as to what is about to happen and why. The structure of our piece is an easy to follow piece in a narrative way so that the audience can follow what is happening and so that the film is clear. The closure of our piece is left as a cliffhanger and the audience is left wondering what happens, which is often used in horror openings to keep the audience wanting to watch the entire film, and this is used as a taster for what is to come.
Our opening film sequence also challenged typical horror conventions. This is due to the fact the protagonist is a male. In typical horror films, you would find the protagonist is a young innocent female. For example, in the opening scene of Jaws, the female is the protagonist. You would usually expect to see females as the protagonists because they are typically seen by most viewers to be less aggressive and more vulnerable to being attacked, as a male would be more known to be the antagonist. This is because of typical characteristics of an antagonist in a horror are usually tall, strong, quick, aggressive and smart.
Our horror film develops a genre by using sound to dictate the feel and atmosphere of the film. This is shown at the beginning of the opening. There are natural sounds like cars in the distance and birds and trees. This is quite innocent and there is no feel of a conventional horror. As our protagonist walks down the path on the phone, and when he says that he's going to cut through the graveyard, the camera cuts to his feet and dark atmospheric music comes in to show that it will be a bad idea to go through the graveyard. This will tell our audience that it's about to get scary and will make them concentrate on the film more and look out for anything which is scary or something that shouldn't be there. This is also shown in Jaws, as when the theme music to Jaws comes in, you know something is about to happen and you prepare yourself for something to happen. This is what we try to achieve by using in our film, but still keeping the natural sounds in place to avoid a flat sound and keeping it realistic.
Also, about halfway through this music, the male turns around because he feels like something is watching him, and he keeps hearing things behind him. When he does this, we have inserted another sound effect over the top of the original scary music, which is quite hard-hitting with bass starting it, and then high-pitched pianos follow, which sound quite strange and uncomforting. The aim of this is to keep the audience on their toes and on the edge of their seat. Ways like this is how we use typical horror conventions within our film, but also challenged them and did things differently. Question 2. How did your media product represent particular social groups?
Our protagonist was a male, which usually in an opening of a horror would be a pretty blonde female, as they are more vulnerable, innocent and in need of protection, and they also appeal to a wide male audience. The representation dates back to earlier horror films that were made in a more sexist era, and the idea has continued. The way a woman character is portrayed during the film can attract both male and female audience members, as they are either attracted to the character or can relate to her stereotypical female characteristics. For example, in the film Jaws, the first person the shark attacked was a young girl. This helps add to the horror and shock to the film as it is a young female. The normal convention of a horror opening is a young woman, blonde and pretty, innocent and vulnerable.
We decided not to follow the conventions of a normal horror film with a young woman. We challenged the normal conventions and used a male protagonist. A male in a horror stereotypically is manly. They work and aren't fazed by noises, the same as a woman protagonist. Through the opening of a film, we tried to make Ryan just shrug off the noises that he heard as the male wouldn't be fazed by the noises, and stereotypically this is what a male would do. They wouldn't want to lose their manliness. His social class was working class, as he was coming home from work in work clothes. We tried to portray him as quite manly, which wouldn't usually work in a horror film. He was a young adult, which made him quite vulnerable, which added to the horror convention, as in most horror films there is a young adult, whether it be male or female. It is never normally an older person. The working class background fits in with the background and social class of the character. The conventions of our horror opening were male, very manly and masculine, working class, and doesn't seem vulnerable. Question 3. What kind of media institution might distribute your media product and why? The Paranormal Activity series was funded, produced and distributed by Paramount Pictures. Therefore, a company like this might be interested in our film as it has more chance of making profit, as our budget was as low as £10. We think they'll be interested in distributing our film because our film is new, and whilst it develops existing conventions of a typical horror film, it also challenges conventions, which a top film distributor like Paramount Pictures, which is also the 5th oldest surviving film distribution and production company which has been around since 1912. So when they were first founded, they wouldn't have had the millions of pounds to invest in films. So Paramount will have a good eye for potential in films that are produced with a minimal budget. Question 4. Who would be the audience for your media product?
Typically, the audience of a horror film is the teenage market, as they take the most interest in horror films at the box office. One of the reasons we chose a teenage market audience is because the protagonist of our film is also a young adult, so therefore there is a link between the two, and it means the audience are more likely to show more of an interest. The age of our target audience is around 15 to 25 years old, as we find they are most likely to relate with the film and the ageing of the character. We have directed our film at a middle-class audience, as the film does not contain a higher social class setting or characters, and therefore it is more likely to audience members will relate. The film is not directed at a specific ethnic group, so therefore it will be suitable for all members of different religions to watch, as this is not an affected factor.
These are our typical audience profiles. Both Beth and Callan are 16 and attend sixth form 5 days a week. They both spend weekends working, and in their spare time they like to stay at home either relaxing or with friends. They both agree that horror films are their favourite genre and can watch them as often as possible. They can relate to the young adult character in our film and the typical conventions it offers. Question 5. How did you attract and address your audience? The character in our opening was used not to only challenge the typical horror conventions, but to also attract the target audience of 15 to 25-year-olds. By using the younger male, it meant that it was clear to the target audience, and therefore I feel we appropriately use this to attract our target audience. The storyline of our film is suspenseful and keeps the audience on their toes, so therefore this is why we have used it as a way to have an audience so that they can understand what is happening and follow the storyline in our piece. In terms of advertising to attract an audience, showing a trailer of the film before another screen horror production at the cinema would mean the correct kind of viewers would be watching and therefore take interest to watching our film. Also, getting as much advertisement as possible online would mean that our target of young adults would be more likely to see this, as there is an ongoing increase with people with internet access and the use of social networking sites. So therefore, this would be an idea of cheap advertisement that is likely to attract the audience that we need and that we aim for. Question 6. What have you learned about technologies from the process of constructing this product? To film and produce our opening, we use different software and technology to make it to the best quality and standard possible. The technology we used in our short film was the Sony HD camera for filming, Adobe Premiere for editing, BlogSuck for blogging, SFX for sound effects, and in Computech for music. During the creation of our short film opening, we have learnt a lot about technologies which has used us to help create our film. We all had a go at editing our film on Adobe Premiere by using different tools like the pen tool, which help reduce or enhance the sound to fade in and out. The Sony HD camera we used to film, we learnt how to steady the camera to get the right position to film. We also found out how to zoom in and out steadily to get the right camera angle. We set up the camera in many different shots and angles and learned how to do this effectively to get a good range of shots to use in our production.
We use Adobe Premiere to edit our film and put it all together. We also learned how to use certain tools like how to make the title sequences and how to pick different fonts and colours. We also cut pieces of sound, video footage, etc. to get exactly what we wanted in our film. We also learned to put in different fades and dissolves in the music and film footage. This made the film flow, and it was good to get us used to the tools. We also used a pen tool so we could add keyframes on the sound to tell the computer when to change the volume of the sound, whether we wanted it to fade louder or to fade quieter. We also used a razor tool to cut a clip and make it into 2 clips. We had to use different websites like sfx.com to get sound effects to add to the horror. We used a stormy, windy sound for when the Macanwire logo came on. This emphasised the logo, and we also put it in an extra effect with the music when the ghostly figure appears behind the male character. This was to put across the audience the horror we were portraying. It also made the ghost stand out and made it more terrifying.
Also, we wanted our film to look colder and not as light to make it more eerie like a typical horror convention. So we decided to add a slight tint of blue to the whole film to make it look like it wasn't so light and look more like a typical horror film. Overall, we think that the technology used helped us gain new skills as well as learning an easy way to edit. It also meant that our media production was to a high quality standard and looked effective for a horror film. Question 7. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learnt in the progression from it to the full product?
Since our preliminary task, we have all learned how to distribute jobs and tasks between us effectively and efficiently, which allowed us to complete our production on time and be able to make a few different versions so we could decide which we thought looked best and allowed our film to flow smoothly.
We have also learned how to set up the Sony HD camera and tripod and make sure that it is level so that all of our shots were straight and the best they could be. Also, we discovered that by filming everything 3 times with 3 different camera angles and movement, that we would always get a good shot so we can choose our favourite for which looked best. From the prelim task, we have been able to develop skills that have learnt about the 180-degree rule so that we aren't breaking any codes and conventions of filming and so no viewers will get confused when watching our film. Also, we was able to develop skills on Adobe Premiere Pro using the colour corrector, video and audio transitions to make our film as professional as it could be. We would like to thank you for your time and that we hope you enjoy our film.